Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Dark Side of the Podcast. I know you were probably expecting Grilling JR, but we've got a little bonus content for you here today. I figure since we're all quarantined, might as well make the most of it. And what we as wrestling fans have been talking about for about a week now is Dark Side of the Ring. We saw the Chris Benoit story last week, and later tonight, we'll see the debut of the New Jack episode on Vice. And I thought, man, it might be a good idea to get the guys behind the documentary in here and break down each episode of the series. And that's what we're going to do right here on the Grill and JR channel. So make sure to tell a friend, hit the subscribe button, and spread the word about this wonderful series that's been put together for Vice. And by the way, if you don't have Vice, don't fret. Episode 1 and 2 of the Chris Benoit story are both on YouTube right now. I encourage you to go watch that episode if you haven't already, and then come back and press play and hear a little bit of behind the scenes from the two guys who helped spearhead this and make it happen for all of us. Of course, we're talking about Evan Husney and Jason Eisener. So let's get into it, guys. I'm really excited to be here. The talk of the internet for the last week or so has been the Vice documentary that you guys dropped on Chris Benoit, and you guys tried something a little different. You did a YouTube release of part 1. Man, that had the internet abuzz. And then we got to see the full sort of super episode. So I guess 2 parts here. Jason, I'll let you start first. Why did you think the Benoit episode was the one to start season 2 with?
Well, originally, when we were kind of on this like hiatus between season 1 and season 2, Evan and I were trying to figure out what we were going to do next. And we really wanted to do the Benoit story for the first season, but we ended up having like our season episode order like cut short last minute. So originally we were supposed to do 8 episodes in season 1, but we only ended up doing 6, which actually really worked out in our favor, so that we could really like spend the time focusing on those 6 episodes. But we always wanted to do this story, and Evan and I were trying to develop it as its own separate thing. We thought maybe we would do like just a separate documentary that could be like 2 or 3 episodes. And it wasn't until we got the order for season 2 that we thought, well, you know what? Why don't we try and do this as like the season premiere? And maybe we could convince Vice to let us do it as a 2-part episode, which they were totally on board to do.
Well, it's interesting that this topic is finally covered, because it feels like it's been sort of no man's land for a lot of folks in the wrestling world, especially those in WWE. You know, of course, in season 1, we saw contributions from Bruce Pritchard, who's now with WWE, and Eric Bischoff, who was there for a cup of coffee. I don't imagine that you had very much support from the WWE side of things on covering Benoit. Evan, did you hear anything, any rumblings about WWE being upset about you guys touching on Benoit? Because it feels like they'd like to just pretend it never happened.
No, we haven't heard anything from the WWE as far as it goes for this episode, or really any of the other episodes that we've done. And I think, just to go on what Jason was saying, I think that was a huge part of why we wanted to tell the story, was that it just seemed like there was no real platform or avenue for a lot of the folks involved in this episode to talk about it. Because when we reached out to people like Vickie Guerrero and David Benoit and Chris Jericho and Dean Malenko, even, like, a lot of them wanted to share their stories and wanted to share their experiences with this. And it just seemed like they had been kind of waiting for that opportunity or that sort of platform where they could share that. And so, that was kind of one of the big eye-opening things for us, was like, we didn't want to just make it about, opening old wounds. Like, we wanted this to be something that could be therapeutic and healing, and to have people talk about it in the most constructive way possible.
So let's talk about that, because it is interesting that you have to sort of examine such a major thing that happened from so many different angles. I felt like you guys did a great job of sort of telling the story from the family perspective, and from the WWE perspective, and from the fan perspective. You sort of had to serve a lot of masters here. And I assume that when you're trying to tell a story from all angles like that, you've probably got quite a guest list that you'd like to have. Was there anybody, you talked about some folks who were maybe jumping at the chance to tell their story. Was there anybody you reached out to that was on the wish list that, for whatever reason, didn't think this was something they should discuss?
Yeah, the only person who was really on the list that that we wanted to have in the story, someone that we planned originally to have in the story, was Kevin Sullivan, was someone that we wanted to participate in the story. Mostly because, he was there, so early on in Nancy's career.
Sure.
And highlighting Nancy's career was such an important aspect of doing this project, as her legacy has been so tarnished and swept under the rug after all these events in 2007, that we felt like it was really important to highlight that. And Jason and I are just huge fans of Nancy's and her whole era as the fallen angel, that especially, but also, Woman and everything else that she did. And, we wanted to really spend a good amount of time on her career, and also the whole fallen angel era. And Kevin is such a huge part of that. And also wanted to highlight aspects of their personal life and have him comment directly. I mean, that was always the intention. When we reached out to him, or, when I did and spoke to him about it, it was tough, because for him, it was just like, it like immediately was a complicated family situation between him and Nancy's family. And I realized that I was kind of stepping into something that was bigger than me and bigger than this project. And it was unfortunate, because I think that had Kevin participated, I think it, to lend his perspective. I mean, of course we would have wanted that. So that was the only person I think that for us that I can think of that was hesitant to participate.
Yeah, and I remember too, Evan. I remember this today. Do you remember when we like approached him? We saw him at a wrestling convention, and we went up to him, and he was in full gimmick, and we we introduced ourselves to him.
Yeah, we did. I don't think we pitched him this, though. I think we were just like,
at that time, yeah. I don't think it was like this was in the cards.
No, I think we just talked about Bruiser Brody, and we talked about other stuff. But yeah, we did introduce ourselves, and he's a fan of the show. It just I think for him, his participation, I just realized that this was a much more complicated situation than just getting him in as as simple as a yes or a no.
Do you think that perhaps his involvement may have caused a little heartburn for Nancy's family as to whether or not they had to decide whether or not they wanted to be involved? Did you feel like it was a sort of us versus them type situation based on their family dynamic?
That was the impression that I got. It was sort of the impression that Kevin didn't want to upset her family by being in it. That's just my understanding. And it just felt like there was a situation that was beyond me, that my influence couldn't fix that or make that, which was unfortunate, again, because it just would have been nice. That was just the one voice that I wish we could have had in the episode.
Jason, I know this sounds silly, but when all of this happened, there's the expression, everything's wrestling. There are a lot of quote unquote smart marks who had some pretty dumb comments that they let fly on social that, oh, it must have been Kevin Sullivan, because once upon a time, Kevin Sullivan had a devil gimmick, but it's a gimmick. He's a real guy. And I guess back in the 70s, all it took to have a devil gimmick was, I don't know, mascara, but, it was a weird thing. And you got to wonder, do you think that your expose that you've done here has put some of those silly or nonsense theories to bed?
Yeah. Like growing up, you always heard like the rumblings of like some of the conspiracy theories, although I never really like entertained them, but I also didn't know like all like the truths to the whole like situation. And even like in our piece, like when you watch it, we don't really like dive into too much of the conspiracy theories, or I don't even think we really get into how people thought Kevin Sullivan was like involved in the murder, because I think when you really sit down with the people who are involved and who are closest to the story and the people who are there, and when you come out of the experience of watching our episode, I think it just leaves zero doubt in what happened and how it really like affected people. I think kind of like the wrestling audience in a lot of ways is just seeing the ramifications, like after all these years, how the people who are closest to the story are still affected by this like every day. And that was one thing when we first met David Benoit, and he was really honest with us, and he told us how like he likes to go on Instagram Live, and that's one way he like communicates with people. And sometimes like people would write in his comments like these like about some of these conspiracies, and it would really like hurt him and affect him in a lot of ways. And even I even through when we were making the episode before it was released, when he would go on live, I would, watch, and sometimes I would see some of those kinds of comments, and he would just let it kind of brush off him. But I imagine it's something he was dealing with internally. But we just wanted to, in a lot of ways, just show it from the people who are closest to the story, how it affected them. And I think when an audience just sees that, it puts no doubt in your mind.
One thing too, just to add on to that, is we did have in the early cuts of the episode, we did have a section that addressed the conspiracy theories, and just like what Jason was saying, like when we talked to Nancy's sister Sandra, or we talked to David about it, it was a source of pain for them, for that to have to keep coming up again, because it makes it harder in their grieving process and coming to terms with this and all of that. And it was something that we had in there, but of course, when you're limited to a 2-hour clock on TV, there's some difficult choices you have to make. But I just remember when it was in there, it just felt like even giving any credence to this, just didn't feel appropriate, because I think it was just like all about, here's what happened. Here's the details of what happened, and from the people that were as intimate with this story. And so for us, it just didn't feel like it as important, but I think it does play a big part into like how the trolls online, sort of have dealt with this story in terms of talking about the conspiracy side of things, and also just, how people have treated David and Sandra, on social media, just with everything that's gone on with this story.
Yeah, I even saw yesterday, I just looked at some of the comments on part 2 of the Benoit story on YouTube, and there was just one person who threw in something like, "Oh, I still think Kevin Sullivan did it." And then there was just like all these replies underneath it from people just saying like, "Stop." Like you could see now people are also standing up for victims in it in a lot of ways. So that's interesting to see.
It's really remarkable to see David Benoit sort of work through this, because we as wrestling fans, outside of, an occasional social media post, I mean, not to do a cheap plug, but when I heard he was at StarCast in Vegas, it got my attention. Like, what? He's here? That's cool. And it was something that was not even remotely on my radar, that this guy may still be a wrestling fan, and to know that he is still a wrestling fan and still enjoys it. And he's now left with, you know, sort of a unique position as a wrestling fan and someone whose dad was in the business. Unlike anybody else, nobody really knows his path and his story. And I thought it was remarkable that you guys were able to add that to the story and reunite him with Nancy's family. And that was such a great moment. I felt like it tried to paint a silver lining in an overall pretty sad story, which is probably what you were going for, right, Evan?
Yeah. I mean, it was always the plan to try and get David in the episode to participate, because I actually saw him at StarCast. Was the first time I saw him. And I just, obviously he looks so much like Chris, and it was just something that hit me. It like struck me. I was like too nervous to like introduce myself to him at the time. But I just remember like thinking, like putting myself in his shoes, like immediately, you know, and being like, what, cause I mean, obviously you can tell he's Chris's son from the way he looks, but like, what would that be like, you know? And what really is his perspective on this? Like, I just kept thinking that, like, it had a profound effect on me. And then when we were putting this together, we were always just like, that was kind of one of the pieces of this, that the fact that, you know, he is the son of Chris from another marriage, but like, what is that perspective to, you know, and so I think reaching out to him was just super important. It was just super important for us to have him in the show. And we reached out to him through Chavo Guerrero, who we have to say, you know, Chavo Guerrero was such a huge part in the making of this episode. Like, not hardly any of it would have even been possible without, you know, him kind of believing in us, and then at the same time introducing us to most of these folks that you see in the show. But we met David, and we flew him out to Toronto, where we produced the show, and we just spent like a weekend with David, like getting to know us. Like, he really wanted to, you know, get to know us, see who we are, which we don't blame him for at all, because I would do the same if, you know, in his shoes. And we just like went to all these arcades around town. We played GoldenEye like a bunch.
Yeah.
Like we played like 3-player GoldenEye matches and played racing games in the arcade, and just like kind of didn't really talk about business, so to speak, or talk about what we were going to do. We just kind of connected with him, you know, and then we went out to this dinner, and that's when he started to kind of really open up with us and feel more comfortable, and started telling us a little bit about little fragments of details of his perspective. And that's when we really knew how important it really was to get him in. And then, especially when he was telling us about the comments online and everything else like that. And then it just was like a process. Like, after we parted ways, we just kept in touch. And then we finally went down to Chicago, where that AEW show was, and you had a StarCast there as well. And then we just, you know, we were just, then he sat down in the interview chair, and, you know, one of the more memorable interview experiences of my career.
What made that interview segment so unique and special based on everything else that you guys have been doing, Jason?
I think there was a lot of emotion leading up to that interview. And to be honest, I don't think Evan and I knew for sure if that interview was going to happen until David sat in the chair in front of the camera.
Yeah, true.
Like he was like on board, but I think it was still just like something that he was really like nervous about, and we were really nervous about as well. But having like Chavo there, he was right there with us, right behind the camera, like with us, and like hearing David's perspective and how he just kind of left it all out, you know, he really opened up in a way, and you can see he gets really emotional. And I think it's important that people see that. And that's why we hang on it for a moment and let you live in that moment, because we really want the audience to really feel it. Like, and I've seen so many comments when people see, you know, there's this moment where he talks about the last weekend he spent with Nancy and Daniel, and that memory really brought up emotional feelings for him, and he breaks down crying. And I think when people see that in the comments that I've been seeing about that moment, it really hits home for people. And I think people can really connect with David by seeing him being so vulnerable, but also being so brave to do that.
Yeah, one thing too, just on that as well. I think that was eye-opening for us. When he finally sat down and committed to the interview, I think it had obviously a very therapeutic effect, I think, for David. But one of the things that became clear, and I've never asked him this, but I just assumed that this was probably one of the first times that he's ever really opened up about this, and I mean, perhaps with anyone. It just had that effect. Like I'm not sure if that's true or not. It just had the effect of him kind of verbalizing this really for one of the first times. And that I think was what led to it being so emotional. But after the interview was over and that it was done, you could just almost see a physical change in him. Like you could almost see that he was standing up a little more straight, and like it was very therapeutic for him, I think, to get the weight off of his chest. And one thing he said in some of the interviews he's done in since the show has come out is he said that he's let 13 years of pain go when he sat down in front of that camera, which lends me to believe that maybe this is one of the first times he's really talked about it. And the next day, I think it was the next day. Yeah, the next day we went to the AEW show where Chris Jericho and company took us backstage, and Chris Jericho, who's interacted with David several times, said the same thing. Like, there's something about you that seems different today. I don't know what it is, but something. And so I think it's had a really positive effect on David, especially being able to finally have some avenue to talk about this.
Well, that's really the cool thing about the episode is that you try to find a positive, and this is something where it's really hard to find. I mean, you got to go digging for it, but you guys really did it, and it jumped off the screen. And something else that jumped off the screen that started a little bit of a debate again is JR's stance that Benoit should not be in the Hall of Fame. And it seems silly that we would even have a discussion like this after a personal tragedy, but I'm glad you guys left that in because I feel like it's something that's still debated a lot online. What'd you think of JR's comments and what sort of feedback have you gotten from that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, I think, and also Dean too. I think Dean Malenko has a good perspective on it too, is that, like, as he respects his career and, all the accomplishments as he have, but you can't give any accolades to somebody who's perpetrated these crimes. And it goes even deeper into a larger conversation that, society has been having in the last couple of years, which is, separating, can you separate, someone's art from who the artist is, and I just, obviously, it's such a complicated subject, especially when you look at, does he belong in the Hall of Fame? Something even more that, we're definitely going to explore with the Owen Hart episode as well, later on down the line. But I think one of the more interesting things that has emerged from this that I've been seeing, and Bully Ray commented on this as well, is the concept of Nancy being in the Hall of Fame.
Right.
And that's something that we wanted to pivot towards as well in the episode. And of course, it's like just knowing what a fan like us here knows about the WWE. Can we picture them actually doing that? I don't know, probably not. But if they did, imagine just if they just did it. You know what I mean? Like, if they just did it, there has to be no mention of Chris, but they just put Nancy in the Hall of Fame. And that would be such a powerful statement. I almost feel like it's teed up for them to do it now,
I do
yeah,
too.
Definitely.
I do wonder if they will, though, because I, like you, think they're going to say, well, if we mention her, then that means we could have some bad PR about the way she passed away, and that could affect our shareholders. But I do think that every other non-WWE Hall of Fame that doesn't have some sort of publicly traded piece, they should put Nancy in this year if she's not already in, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, she was such a pioneer for her time. And for us, in a lot of ways, when we were going through, especially her Fallen Angel era, we just became obsessed with it because it really is the coolest aesthetic. It's just one of the coolest vibes, and how she took inspiration from a Uriah Heep vinyl cover. We were just thought she was just so cool. And for us, in a lot of ways, it was cooler to feature that stuff than the Chris Benoit like footage or the.
Yeah, and also it's like you know, to also learn from Sandra that, you know, she really was a creative force behind a lot of that stuff. When it came to those early years with Kevin, like she had that vision for it. You know, she was rock and roll, she was metal, you know, she loved all that stuff, all that music and that aesthetic. And she really was the one that went out and bought a lot of that stuff, had the ideas of incorporating a lot of those costuming and makeup stuff and a lot of the aesthetic that's really brought to that image. And even in a lot of the photographs they did, I mean, she was a real, you know, major artist, had a major artistic influence on that stuff. And that stuff is just like, when you go back and you watch all those old promos or you see photos of her and Kevin like on the beach with like swords, you know, and stuff. Yeah. It's some of the coolest shit in 80s wrestling, like hands down.
Well, something else that you guys have really mastered is the reenactments. And I've always been fascinated with your social media postings where you sort of show behind the scenes, how that all comes together. And I know hasn't aired yet, but you had a clip of, I think it's you guys wearing the Road Warrior spikes, climbing down those famous NWA stairs. It's such a cool look. But tell me about, you know, this one and with Benoit, the way you cast someone to play Chris Benoit. You know, it's sort of the no-fly zone of professional wrestling, but I think you actually used a professional wrestler to play Chris in the episode.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like, you know, our process in making, like, putting these reenactments together is, it's so hectic because everything, we're just moving so fast. And, you know, we knew that was, I mean, obviously such an important role in telling the story. And the person we turned to play Chris was actually a wrestler named Tyson Dukes, who he's a local wrestler here in Ontario, and obviously he's had an awesome career as well. And we've turned to him to play several other characters before. I think he actually played Dutch Mantell in the Bruiser Brody pilot, and he's played someone else too, hadn't he? It's like I can't even remember. I think he's played somebody else.
Yeah, I'm not sure. He definitely played Dutch, but he even when we spent time with him doing the Bruiser Brody episode and just in between takes and getting to know Tyson, he told us that he actually met Chris Benoit a couple times backstage. And so he had that connection. He was very inspired by Chris's work that he incorporated into his own wrestling. And so we knew that he had already studied Chris Benoit's work. He would already know the mannerisms, he know the move sets. And so when it came time to cast that character, I think he was like the first person we thought of. And he was absolutely down, and he totally got the nuance of it and the professionalism that had to go behind that. Because even, you know, on set, you know, it's when you're recreating some of these scenes, a lot of the crew members are fans of wrestling, and so it's kind of intense in a lot of ways for some people. But the way Tyson dealt with it in such a professional way, it just made it so comfortable for everyone.
Yeah. And obviously there's a lot of sensitivities with this story in particular. And, I think one of the bigger challenges that we had in putting together, like, what are the things that we're going to reenact? What are the things that we're going to show? Was obviously, you know, from the beginning, we were never, you know, gonna try and, you know, reenact the events of that weekend or anything. We always wanted to keep that at a distance. And mainly the things that we wanted to emphasize were the effects that I think the most important stuff that you see in there is really the effects that Eddie Guerrero's passing had on Chris, which was such another just a huge part of the story and one aspect of the story that hasn't gotten a ton of attention before. But it was the common thread that most of all of the subjects in the episode brought up in their interviews was being a very big life-changing moment for Chris. And so to be able to kind of structure a lot of the reenactments to heighten that side of the story was one of the more important aspects of what we want to do.
Talk to me a little bit about the scene that you guys reenacted and Vickie Guerrero is telling the story but man, it stood out. I'll never forget. My wife and I looked at each other when we saw it and thought, boy, that's weird. When she found Chris, in her and Eddie's bedroom on his side of the bed, hugging Eddie's pillow. And it just stood out like, this is way deeper than I ever imagined their relationship. And that led a lot of people online to wonder, you know, what was the nature of their relationship? Were they codependent on one another? And I don't know that you could really argue that based on the way it feels like Chris responded. I mean, crying on another guy's pillow in his marital home, that's a deep affection right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Vickie's story about Chris, actually Vickie's whole perspective was one thing that was very new to us, because we had gone into this episode heavily researched and, you know, and had known a lot about what other people have said before about their relationship. But I think Vickie's just entire story about Chris after Eddie's passing, and especially Nancy's involvement, you know, and just how close Vickie and Nancy really were, especially at that time. And that to us was very new to see, like, how, you know, deep their relationship was. I mean, I think, as you know, a lot of people also talk about, it doesn't really come through as much in the episode, but it was definitely something that people talked about, was, you know, how Chris wasn't really that much of an emotional guy. You know, he was a person that was very much inside and very much to himself. And I think that the relationship he developed with Eddie over the course of several years, I think was, you know, he was that person. And especially, you know, you hear, you know, I mean, he was that person that allowed him to have that sort of emotional outlet. And another thing you also hear, and this is a common theme in most of the episodes that we've done, is that these guys travel so much on the road together. They spend so much time together that it's almost like, you know, especially like when we're talking to Animal about the Road Warriors. I mean, he says, I was married to Hawk for 22 years. You know, these guys spend so much time together and away from their families that I think that, you know, those bonds and having that emotional reliability or some other, you know, closeness to another person, I think when that was gone, I just would imagine that for Chris, there wasn't any outlet anymore for him that he had, and especially if he was having problems at home, or whatever, like, you know, that I just could imagine that would be very, very difficult.
It really stood out to me because you have to appreciate, this is a woman who just lost her husband, and she's consoling her husband's friend in that moment. It's
right.
Just remarkable when you really think about their connection. And I do appreciate that you guys spent a little bit of time on the passing of Eddie Guerrero, because I don't think a lot of fans knew the circumstances around which it happened, you know, where you talked about that Chavo found him before he was all the way gone and he passed away in Chavo's arms. Man, talk about a tearjerker. That there's so much loss and devastation in this story, and not just for the Benoit family.
Yeah, I was going to say just that, like, for Chavo Guerrero, it's like, you just imagine, you know, we've become pretty close with Chavo over the course of this. But you just imagine for Chavo to be, you know, the person that, you know, was there when Eddie passed, you know, his uncle, when he passes, and he's tied to that story. And then how and then his relation, like after Eddie passed away, one other thing that's not really built upon in the episode, but Chavo became really close with Chris Benoit after Eddie passed away. It almost like, not as a surrogate to you know, his relationship with Eddie, but they became really close, and they actually traveled a lot for a long time after that. And so then for Chavo to be the person there for when Eddie passes away, and then Chavo to be the person that Chris reached out to over the course of the weekend of Chris's final weekend. I mean, that's just wild, you know, for him to have been so close to both of those tragedies is wild.
Yeah. And we didn't have time to share it in the episode, but there was like a moment where Chavo spent like a day or a weekend with the family.
The weekend before.
And he told us how he had brought his belts inside, and how Daniel really wanted to play with his belts, and he spent some time playing with Daniel. But that, things seemed pretty normal.
Yeah.
On that weekend.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
Let's talk about Daniel, because something that was reported a lot way back in 2007 when all this happened that isn't touched on in the episode is that perhaps Daniel had a unique illness or health situation. And I think at the time people were calling it Fragile X syndrome, which I'll admit I'd never heard of before or after. Was that ever explored in any of your work on this?
It was. It was again kind of lumped into the I guess we'll call it the conspiracy theory section of the episode back when in the earlier longer edits of the episode. And it was something that was introduced in the narrative of this as a potential motive, because when this story broke, I mean, obviously it became such a major news story everywhere and everyone was searching for answers. And then of course, at the time it was steroids, when he was found to have testosterone, when he was had exaggerated amounts of testosterone found in his body, then that was kind of the smoking gun. And then the media kind of moved on. But at the time, right around that in the narrative, when they were searching for answers, one of the theories that was introduced was that Daniel had Fragile X syndrome or a form of autism or something. And Chris was ashamed of that or something. After Sandra did Chris Jericho's podcast, that was the first time she ever spoke about any of this, and that was a few years ago. And that was a huge guiding influence for us at the time, because it really showed us, wow, here's another side of the story that could be built upon, and really showed us that we need to have her as a part of this. But when she basically debunked that in that interview, and as well as in ours, it just was kind of one of those things that, when you're trying to tell this story and you're telling it for people who maybe have heard it for really the first time, it just felt like, you have to make choices to cut things to get it to time. I know it's kind of a boring answer, but there are things when it's like, okay, you're going to introduce a bit of information and then it's not true. It just, I don't know. It just didn't seem like it was worth that amount of runtime to introduce something that was so easily refutable. But from Sandra's perspective, that was something that was never true.
Yeah. And I wish it came across even more so in the episode, or we had more time for it, but like Sandra was extremely close with Daniel. Like, she was there for most of his life. And I think they were even going to build like a home on the property for Sandra to live on, so that she could continue, I think, being very close to Daniel's life. And so it's just, she very much, defended Daniel, and she just, dismissed all those rumors.
Well, it's interesting to look at, because you wonder, and we all, there's so many questions with this story, because you can't imagine getting to that place with your wife. But then I think what does it for a lot of people is to say, okay, maybe there was a moment of passion, or there was too much drinking, or something horrible happened in a moment with your wife, but then to go and do that to your son, maybe there was some thinking that, and obviously this is a very warped point of view, but you wonder what was going through his mind. And of course we'll never know. And it was absolute, mayhem, but maybe the thinking is, I don't want to leave. I'm going to prison now, or I'm going to die. And his mom is no longer with us. And you wonder like what that meant when he put the Bible there, and then to see that there was a knife near the bed. It's just, there's so many unanswered questions about the Daniel piece, because I think it's so hard for moms and dads to imagine ever hurting their own child. Wouldn't you agree, Jason?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can totally understand how that's hard to, deal with and wrap one's head around. It's just, it really is unfathomable, but what, like you said, we don't know what was going on through Chris's mind, but he was going through a tremendous amount of mental health issues. And we know, and we've seen in lots of other cases where mental health issues have led down a road, a destructive path that have destroyed families.
Yeah, especially with CTE and the prevalence of that now being something we're much more aware of now than we were in 2007. And one thing too, it's like it's also like just from some of the other details that are shared in the episode, obviously the internet searches that Chris did, and everything like that, you can just tell that, at least from my point of view, that he's just not in a sane state of mind, that there was something that had happened in that moment where he's not operating on any sort of sane level. But furthermore, to going to the CTE conversation, one of the other reasons to do this project is that back in 2007 when it happened, because steroids became sort of the catalyst of the story, like this is what happened, this is why this is a roid rage incident or whatever. And since 2007, 13 years ago now, there's so many more conversations that people are having around mental health and with regards to wrestling and other contact sports. I mean, it's not just a physical mental health to it. There's also emotional sides to it as well, which is one of the areas that we, kind of explore as far as Eddie's passing and how that impacted Chris. But another thing too, and another just thing to consider, and this isn't something also we had the runtime for in the episode, but it's an important detail, which is, and I know this too from Conrad talking to so many different wrestlers, but it's sobering to know how many of these guys have had to deal with, so many deaths. It's amazing that these wrestlers, they probably know 50 or 60 people, maybe more, that have died. People they were close to, people they've traveled with, people they've worked with. And I can't think of many other industries or situations that another person would be in on a more of a day-to-day basis where that would be what your circumstance is. So one other aspect too is that Nancy and Chris both were, heavily grief-stricken in the last few years of their lives by the loss of a lot of different people. We talk about Johnny Grunge, we mentioned that, but there's a whole host of other people too that had a profound effect on Chris. Owen Hart being one of them, even though that was, 8 years before the tragedy. And then, you have, tons of people that they were close to that, people described that, in the last few years of their lives that they were kind of in a perpetual state of grief. And you can only imagine, if they were self-medicating at that time or how they were dealing with that, and it all, built to a head.
The CTE thing is something that is definitely, well past now. We're all very familiar with it now as compared to back then, but some of the things that it led Chris to do, or so we all assume it was CTE based on the information we have about his brain now. But the thing that has never really been fully documented, I don't think, on a major scale, is what did happen. And you guys had to sort of tiptoe a little bit because there's been books written and some other specials out there, and they go into varying degrees of detail of exactly what those final 3 days look like. When did you guys decide, or how did you guys sort of tiptoe the line to figure out what needed to be covered and what we should probably lay off? Well,
Jason, feel free to tag in if I'm yammering too much, but you can't tell this story without just describing the details of the crimes. Even though we are wrestling fans, and I even grew up as a fan of Chris, and I can't tell you how many times I've played as him in video games and watched his matches and been a fan as well. But you can't discredit the what these crimes were and how really what effect they have, especially on the people. And so for us, or the people involved in the story. So for us, it was important to have an objective voice, actually two objective voices you see in the episode, to really walk us through those details. And they're important for a number of reasons. One, I think there is kind of a, for wrestling fans, I think there has been difficulty coming to terms with what the details are. I saw on Twitter the night that we premiered, I was a little surprised to see how many wrestling fans had not known all the details. There was a lot of people that didn't know this took place over the course of 3 days, or the way that Nancy was found, or what had happened to her, or what had happened to Daniel specifically. And I think it's important for those to know when it comes to conversations around Hall of Fame and legacy and those types of things. And so for us, it was always important to show and to highlight those details, even for how difficult and for how horrifying they really are. But you can't tell the story without including those details for those reasons. But for us, it was always to do it in a tasteful way. We didn't want to, or as tasteful way as we could, in order to still, communicate the this is what happened, but also trying not to sensationalize it in ways that it has been over the course of the last 13 years when this has been, covered. And that was important to Jason and I in terms of how to show that, right?
Yeah, like from the beginning, like you said earlier, we didn't want to do reenactments of the events of that weekend. But we had just like very detailed descriptions, and we really prepared for those interviews. With the police officer who was the first responder, and just I think with his perspective and him telling exactly like how he saw it and what he saw, and we chose to just show the police photos from the scene, minus any photos of anyone's body or anything. But we felt that just showing the emptiness of the house kind of showed how their presence was, how Nancy and Daniel and the family's presence was missing from this home. And I think for people, the effect of that interview and seeing those pictures really takes you there. And kind of what Evan was saying is that we needed to paint that picture so that it could, in some ways, diminish those like conspiracy theories. And I think when people hear the truth of it and hear how scary it was, I think that really hits home for the audience.
Right.
It was it's eerie to see the police tape there and to see the news from the time. And one of the challenges you guys probably had is, hey, this is a silly thing, but I thought watching it back, well, that house is sold now. Somebody else actually lives there. How are you guys going to be able to sort of show that? And the workaround is the miracle of drones, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah. We had just like our series producer, Alex McIntosh, who worked so hard on this show with us, did so much, was in the trenches with us throughout this whole thing, because we made 10 hours of the show in the last 9 months or whatever it's been. But Alex had this contact with this incredible drone group. I think that was based in the area, and they just did a phenomenal job in terms of covering it and covering that house and showing it in different ways and very effective ways. And yeah, that was just one of the things that we, again, in trying to put this together, it's like, from a production standpoint, even though you're talking about very difficult, moments in this story, you have to show something, you have to cover it with something. And so we felt that, again, just showing the house from a distance and showing the absence of, the family in the house from the police photos was just kind of the only way that felt like we could do it while still, being mindful of, everybody else who's people who are involved in the story, and also, and not being gratuitous or not being sensationalist.
Yeah. And that's got to be a real challenge, because this is something that, you could see in the hands of some other folks where they would really get sort of clickbaity with some of the topics that they covered, directions that they took the story. But one of the things, and we touched on it at the top of the show, that I think really got people's interest up is when you released the first half on YouTube. I don't think you guys did that for season 1. Do you think that helped you overall? I mean, it certainly felt like a lot more people were talking about it. I think, Evan, you and I were even communicating before it came out. Benoit was trending on Twitter, which is, interesting because he's been, sort of hidden from WWE archives for so long that now, out of nowhere, seemingly, thanks to you guys, it's part of the national conversation again. And YouTube played a big part of that, did it not?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely. I think season 1 we did do a little teaser on YouTube of putting out the Bruiser Brody episode as like a sneak peek. But with this, it was actually something that Vice had brought to us. I want to say 24 hours before they released it, right?
Pretty much, like yeah. That. It was like at first, it was like the first minute when you heard it, we were both kind of like, "Oh, why are we doing that?" And then we quickly realized, "Oh no, this is a good idea." Like, and that's ultimately what we want. We want people to see it, and so.
Yeah. It was a little overwhelming at first, like to wrap our heads around it, because obviously we've worked on it for so long, and the way that we wanted people to see it was as a full feature length 2-hour piece. That's how we always envisioned it. And it was tricky too, because like Vice TV isn't formatted for such a thing usually. This is kind of the first time they've done a piece of this length, and so there's been some concessions we've made on that side, because now I think it's going to be airing in always as 2 parts and things like that. But so when they proposed the idea, it was kind of like, ooh, I don't know, and then it quickly became like the right idea, because it just, it gave it this visibility that I don't think it would have had we just waited till that Tuesday, till when it premieres. And it also entices people to, here's the first part, now you're going to have to see the second part. And I think it led people to like, how is the second part going to be handled? Because, the first part was pretty empathetic, and, it's going to be interesting to see how it all unfolds. So I think that just, it drove a lot of people to wanting to check it out, which is always a good thing.
Well, one of the other, good ideas, you talked about YouTube being a good idea, was the way you were able to splice in some old WWF/WWE footage, because I don't feel like that was done using traditional methods. You guys had an interesting sort of filter where you made it look sort of the way we remember. What can you talk to us about the production and sort of artistic way that you were able to put some of that footage in here?
Well, with all the archival footage, it's actually, we run it all through an old tube television, and then we film the screen of the tube television. And so that's kind of how it has this, I don't know, I guess almost kind of like a retro feeling effect, but it really unifies the look of all of our archival. And just, we always just have gone, like Evan and I have always been huge fans of shoot interviews. And we just felt that like, if we could just get like a really wicked looking lens on these wrestlers and get decent microphones, their storytelling abilities are so incredible that they already like paint the picture for you. And so it leaves us, I feel like, with little work to do. Like, we just have to kind of paint a fainted picture of that memory that they're describing. And so that's why we chose to go with the out of focus look, to kind of replicate the feeling of like a blurred memory. And it also really helps our budget, because we can be more resourceful with our money in other ways, instead of having to build like full on sets to replicate like the eras in which these stories are taking place.
But it's also like an incredibly laborious way of going about it. Just in terms of the archival, like there's many times where it's like, okay, we've just shot, like an hour of archival across many different episodes, and then, oh shit, something just totally messed up and we have to do it all over again. Or there's a flicker in the TV that, messed everything up or something. So it's always been kind of the bane of our existence, but we're kind of perfectionists in terms of the aesthetic of the show, and we just always wanted to have that kind of feeling, because we can't handle, because there's a lot of things we do get from YouTube, and like, we just can't handle the look of YouTube, and as part of a television show. You shouldn't be watching YouTube on a TV show. And then with the reenactments, I think you're underselling too. It is it is another like cool aspect of the show. I mean, it's something that makes it very unique, but I mean, it's another hurdle and another step in the process in order to put it all together. But you have to have something in order to cover the aspects of the story that take place out of the ring. And that was something that we, from the very beginning, was very important to try and capture. Like, how are we going to capture these guys coming into the locker room or their home lives or their travel lives? And then, one thing for us that we always try and highlight, because it's such a huge inspiration for us in making this show, is this documentary film from the 80s called The Thin Blue Line, which is like the seminal true crime documentary of the 80s, really kind of one of the first like modern documentaries in a lot of way. And that film is so, like, if you go back and watch that now, I mean, we're just like totally, taking that vibe and turning it up for wrestling. But that was the idea. It was shoot interviews done in the style of The Thin Blue Line, was kind of the, like, which is almost kind of funny to think about, but that was the idea of the show.
Well, it was a home run, and you talked about how laborious part of this was. Jason, if you had to guess, how many man hours do you think you guys put in this Benoit episode?
Oh my God. Thousands. I don't know. It like we have spent months and months of time. I know I have just myself. I'd probably put at least a couple hundred hours just into the editing of it. And we had another editor, Jason Cook, spend hundreds and hundreds of hours on it as well.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
Story editors and other producers and archive folks. I mean, everything. I mean, it's been a pretty big production, and it's I'm not trying to gain any sympathy by saying this, but it's like, really kind of making a feature length movie while also making a TV show is kind of what it's felt like. Yeah. Like, we've always kind of considered the Chris Benoit episodes as one feature length film that we've been making, but then, there's also these 8 other, episodes we have to do as part of a TV show, that we've produced since July, I think, is when we started. So it's just been a mad dash, and all hands on deck. We're not a big team. And just trying to produce all of this.
Yeah, and I think, Evan, you tallied up, like, for season 2, like, how many people we interviewed for it, and I think the number came out to, was it like 87 interviews that we did?
87 interviews,
and each interview is like 3 to 4 hours long.
Yeah,
and so when you just think about that alone, that
with 2 cameras and
very daunting.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I told it was 87 interviews, and I think it was just about over 450 hours of footage we filmed for season 2.
Let's talk a little bit about Vice, because I feel like they deserve a lot of credit here, because for a long time, people have had ideas about wrestling content on TV, and we've always been told there's no appetite. And then somehow you guys managed to sell it to Vice here. And I'm curious what that relationship has been like. We've heard, as people who aren't in the industry, that sometimes the channel or the executives will give you quote unquote notes on what they're looking for one way or another. What was that process like with Vice throughout season 2?
So, the relationship with Vice, I mean, I've been involved with the company, on and off since I think about 2013. So I've had a lengthy relationship with Vice. I will say there has been a lot of ups and there's been a lot of downs in terms of the working relationship with the company over the course of this whole show. And from the very beginning, as frustrating as sometimes it can be, just with any network too, first off, the kudos I will give to them is that I think it does take a little bit of a network to have the balls in order to take on a show like this that is going to cover, stories that are this controversial, especially in this world, and all the. And also never having really made a show that incorporates, reenactments and this level of travel and this level of, whatever. So getting it off the ground, I mean, it didn't happen overnight. I will say that. It definitely was a very slow process in the beginning. I mean, because you remember when we showed you the Bruiser Brody pilot, I mean, that was, we had made that as a proof of concept in 2017. And then it was like, 6 months later, we had to fight to get them to give us a full season. I mean, we thought we had hit it out of the park with that. And so it was a little bit of like, more salesmanship was needed to get season 1 off the ground. And then when season 1 was finished, there was more salesmanship that needed to occur to actually get the show on the air.
Yeah, there was like a point where I think like after we had finished it, that they were going to like wait like another year before releasing it. And you didn't have the heart to tell me.
I didn't. I lied. I straight up lied.
You lied.
There was a moment where we finished all of season 1. We finished it, done, delivered, stepped away, and then it was like I think I just heard nothing from them about when it was going to go on the air. And then I was like, I got to get to the bottom of this. So I like went to the office to go like just try and literally like knock on people's doors. And this guy who ran into me in the hallway, whose responsibility it was to program, was basically, yeah. So we've been thinking that we're gonna do this in I think February of 2020. Wow. So imagine that. Imagine season 1 coming out like 2 months ago. Right. And I just couldn't. And this was in February of 2019 when I'm hearing this news, and I just couldn't like. I couldn't wrap my brain around that. So this is a funny story, actually. So what happened is I was like, I refuse to accept this. And that's, going back to kind of like, wrestling, I think, having the stigma in entertainment or in television of not drawing audiences, or audiences not like, yeah, it might get good ratings, but do those people really mean anything to advertisers? I think that's always been kind of a stigma. I'm sure Eric Bischoff talks about that in your podcast or whatever, So we were up against that too, in some ways. And what wound up happening is we wound up seeing some of the ratings they were getting on some of the other shows. And this is right around the time AEW was starting up. I think they were just about to announce their deal with TNT. They hadn't done it yet. And so what I did is we basically put together an email that was just kind of showing that as soon as AEW arrives on the scene and it creates this new competitive environment where it's going to create, where wrestling is going to be on more major networks. And I think WWE had already announced they were moving to Fox for their other show. And so it was just literally like, this is going to be more mainstream on cable. And we also illustrated the fact that AEW fans, because they had done a handful of events at that point, and we also illustrated that, look, all of these fans that are going to these shows in Vegas or whatever, like, I can't remember what the percentage was, but there was like a percentage of fans where there was a big amount that were actually flying in. These all fly-in audiences. These aren't people that are, that are local going to this event. There's a lot of fly-in people, and they're going to StarCast, and they're going to these other places, and it's a fan convention environment. I mean, there's money being spent here, and so kind of illustrating that this is kind of what the fandom of wrestling is. It's really kind of, it's a very lucrative thing, and so then it was literally in tandem with them getting ratings on other shows, and that news, that email of literally here's a way to save this, to salvage ratings, and look at how these audiences are popping up everywhere over wrestling. That's what sold it. And then eventually it was like, be careful what you wish for, because at that moment they were like, okay, kid, you're on the air in 2 weeks. And we literally had 2 weeks notice to get season 1 on the air with no posters, no trailers, nothing, zero. And so we had to it was a mad dash. Then it was going from 0 to 60 to getting this thing on the air back in, I think it was April of 2019.
It's remarkable to hear sort of behind the scenes of how this all came together, but let's talk about it as an artist, not the salesman hat, but the artist. When this Benoit episode aired, you've put thousands of hours into the episode. Do you watch it for the first time and think, man, if there's one thing left out of that, I wish we could have just got this one thing in the story, what would that have been, Jason?
I'm not sure. There's definitely, I have like some regrets pertaining to some of the other episodes. Like there are so many things in the New Jack episode that I wish we could have fit it in. But for the most part, I feel really good about the Benoit episode. Like like we were saying, we exhausted it so much. We put so much time into it, countless hours into editing it, that I think for the most part, like I feel pretty good about it. Like I can be very Evan and I are very picky, and so we could probably nitpick things, and I have a hard time watching things that I've created after I've sent it out into the world. So I haven't sat down and watched it since we finished it, since it's podcast. But we're still finishing 8 other episodes, so I'm like 24/7 cutting the other.
He's cutting Road Warriors right now. Yeah, he's this is my break from Road Warriors right now. I was just gonna say, like, watching it back for the first time when it aired on Tuesday night, because I was watching it live, and it was like I felt really good about it, because I mean, seeing people respond on Twitter live was wild, and seeing Dark Side of the Ring trend was something I never thought I would ever see. But like, I got emotional during parts of it. I've seen this thing hundreds of times, and that was cool. And I also find that when we cut things out of the episodes, like when things, we have to make those difficult decisions of like, okay, it's got to go, and we like cut it out, that there's part of me that just forgets about it. Like, it's not part of my like thought process in the episode very much, unless someone brings it up or asks a question about it, then I'll remember it. But usually when something's gone, it's just gone, you know? But easily with the Chris Benoit story, it could have been longer. And definitely we're seeing with some of the other episodes that we're doing, it gets tough when you get down to the wire and you have to make difficult decisions. It's really tough. And there's some tough ones in there for sure coming up.
Well, talk to me about these extras. You know, I guess extras is maybe the wrong word, but the things that you had to edit, the stuff that wound up on the cutting room floor. Is there a plan to release that anywhere, anyhow, anyway?
Well, we do. Like occasionally we release stuff online. And every episode we have to deliver these kind of like, they're like little deleted scenes that could be used for other broadcast networks in other countries that may have like different lengths for their broadcast times, and so they'll use these little deleted scenes to like fill gaps. But once we're like done cutting the shows, Evan and I spend a lot of time cutting deleted scenes or scenes that we really wish we could have had in the episodes.
There's so many things we could release. It's literally it's like time. It's literally just time, because it's like I feel like season 1, when that was done, I think it finished in the end of May. Literally 30 days later, we were out on the road filming for season 2. And right now, even though that Chris Benoit that episode is premiered on TV, you know, last week, you know, we're still very much engaged on the day-to-day of finishing and delivering. I think we're still delivering 7 or 6 episodes still.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of time. So I think once this is all done, then maybe we can either release some more things, because there's tons of stuff, or we just have to like, you know, start like an intern program and just get people to go nuts.
Yeah, like we were saying before, there's 87 interviews, each one being around 4 hours. It's just this mountain of material. In some ways, Evan and I feel like we're like these archivalists, like going around North America, just like capturing these little time capsules of these interviews that, you know, maybe, who knows, someday maybe there'll be a way to like, you know, pull things out of them and share more things from them, because there's an incredible amount of history that we captured that's in those interviews.
Yeah, if the world goes full chaos mode, you know, we'll definitely have a bunker full of shoot interviews that we can all watch.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, you mentioned that occasionally you guys drip some stuff out online. Tell everybody where they can follow you guys individually and the show on social media and any other platform.
Well, you can follow Evan and I both, Evan Husney at on Twitter, and Jason Eisener on Twitter, and our show account is Dark Side of ring. Is that right, Evan?
I'll do this part. You can follow me at Evan Husney on Twitter and Instagram. You can follow Jason at Jason Eisener on Twitter and Instagram. And the show is at Dark Side of Ring on Twitter. That was because it was too many characters. And at Dark Side of the Ring on Instagram. And yeah, we post stuff. Vice post stuff on their YouTube, and we're going to be releasing as much extra stuff as we can, and hopefully when we talk about the New Jack episode, we can talk about a whole nother documentary we could make out of the New Jack footage.
Well, I guess we should mention that's what's next. It's coming up tonight on Vice TV. You don't want to miss it. There is a clip of the show pinned to the top of the Twitter page. I've had the opportunity to see this episode. It is wild and off the rails. And what's great about this series, I don't know that we've really talked about this, but let me sort of draw a correlation here. My mom absolutely hates football, but she loves Hard Knocks on HBO, sort of the story of the guys off the field and who they are in real life and what their trials and tribulations are, and just tell their story. And my wife absolutely hates professional wrestling, but she thinks Dark Side of the Ring is the coolest thing ever because it's the story of these guys.
Wow.
And wrestling is just sort of in the background. And I heard several years ago, Chris Jericho said, WWE isn't about pro wrestling, just like Walking Dead isn't about zombies. They're dramas with zombie as the backdrop, and WWE is a drama with wrestling as the backdrop. And I sort of feel the same thing about Dark Side of the Ring. Like, she had no idea who New Jack was and had no interest, but was captivated by this crazy character that the world is going to meet tonight live on Vice.
Oh boy. Yep. They sure are.
And we sometimes say, like, if people like thought that Joker movie was like a really good dissection of like a psychological like thriller, like wait till like people see the New Jack story and how we dive into the mind of New Jack.
Well, join the conversation tonight. Is there a certain hashtag, Evan, that we should be looking for as we're watching on Vice together?
Just hashtag Dark Side of the Ring.
Hashtag Dark Side of the Ring. And what do you think? Are we sort of doing a Dark Side of the podcast here? Is that what we're going to go with?
I guess so. We could do that.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Dark Side of the podcast. We're going to keep cranking these out here. Hit the subscribe button, tell a friend, and tune in right after you watch the Vice documentary tonight, and we'll be back to break down New Jack. We're really looking forward to this. It's been fun visiting with you guys and talking about what I think is the greatest documentary series ever in the history of professional wrestling. I know you guys hear that all the time.
Wow.
Whoa. Hey, now.
How is it not true? Guys, the amount of time and effort and energy and production quality you've put into this, it just blows away everything else. And sometimes when these documentaries are produced in wrestling, they're through a certain lens, and you guys try to view it objectively. And in my opinion, that makes it better. Is that fair?
That's great. Just so I know too, what, Conrad, is your favorite wrestling documentary?
Man, I tell you, I really love the Bruiser Brody one that you guys showed me with,
not ours though. Not ours.
Like, other ones.
You know, there hasn't been a ton of really, really good ones. I thought Wrestling with Shadows was well done. I think Beyond the Mat is held in maybe too high of a regard, but it's still a fun watch, and it was cool to see sort of a wrestling documentary in a theater. That was something I never thought I would see in my lifetime. But I've thought that the guys have done a really good job in recent years that were associated with High Spots when they did something about the Crockett's and things like that. But you guys' production level just takes it to a whole new level for the space. And I'm sure a lot of that is because you've got the support of Vice. And I think it's so cool that a channel like Vice is not only giving it the space to air it, but putting the investment behind it to make it look good.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the fact that they've approached us and like, hey, you guys we're going to put together like a Talking Dead show or whatever. I was like, whoa, it's funny to think, I never would have thought that would be something that they would do. And it seems like, that the fact that this has, earned the ratings, and we can't thank fans enough for tuning in, because I mean, that's really what's going on here is, that there is an audience that really wants to see this. And, the fact that everyone keeps tuning in every week and makes more of these shows more possible. Like, we can't thank you guys enough for that. And yeah, it's it's good. Like, it's been a wild experience in these last 3 years have felt like a blur, just like one wrestle blur,
Yeah.
but Jason and I are fans. We've always been fans. I mean, I was a listener of your show, from the beginning, and we still are, even though we're hearing a lot of these tragic stories of the ring, Jason and I are still buying action figures every week, and we're still tuning in and watching, we're still watching all the shows every week and everything. So, this hasn't, we're hopefully, considered by you guys as one of you.
Yeah, like everything about the show really comes from a place of love and how much we love wrestling. And in a lot of ways, we wanted to make the show so that people could kind of get on board, or at least kind of see it through our eyes and see like why we love it so much. And a lot of it for us comes from like the human stories that are from the behind the scenes stories of wrestling.
And the shoulder pads.
Pads. I got to tell you, I think that you guys being fans really comes through the show. I know it's not something you guys are going to participate in, but I saw the Reels version of Benoit when I realized they were riding your coattails, and I'd already seen your episode. So I wanted to watch that one. And there were 2 or 3 things in there that just stood out where I was like, well, whoever put this in here was not a wrestling fan, because that's not remotely close to accurate. And even a casual wrestling fan would have known the difference. So I think that's the difference, is you guys are not just going in there and sort of pouring ingredients into a bowl and here's the show. No, how wrestling fans think and enjoy the show and what we would want to see. And I think that really is the difference in what you guys have done. Is yes, there may be some executive somewhere who greenlit this thing and put it on the air, but the folks who actually had their hands in it, were wrestling fans, and that comes through the show. And it's something that I think maybe we take for granted, but you guys and your voice in the show is the best part.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
So
yeah.
much.
Like, we're, in a lot of ways, we're very critical of wrestling fans, and just critical of everything that we really like, including like movies and everything else. And so, we approach this with such a critical, wrestling eye in a lot of ways. And we're like our own, like, worst critics. And even sometimes when we see people have like a criticism about our show, we'll agree with it.
Yeah, very true. And it's also too, like, it stresses our team out, for sure, when, there's so many times when like they're working on something and then it bottlenecks because, Jason and I, like, we'll be like, no, you can't have, Eddie Guerrero wearing those tights in this shot because it's not the time when he would have had those tights or whatever,
Yeah.
And everyone's like, no. And then like, everyone's just, they're not as like crazy about those detail.
Yeah. They'll be like, well, you're going to hold up production for like 30 minutes, which is like forever on set. Like, you just don't do that. But we did it in this case because it was so important.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, those little details make the show, and I'd be remiss if I didn't at least address something that Evan, you and I have been talking about. There's been a little bit of talk based on a tweet sent out by Dave Meltzer that he was excluded from the opportunity to talk about the Benoit episode because I think he's referring to you, are a big fan of Bruce Pritchard's podcast. And I said, when I was tagged in the tweet, hey guys, that's just not true. Ask the producers, because to me, this is like a non-issue, but I know you have since spoken to Dave and sort of cleared the air on that. Is there anything you want to say on that?
Yeah. Basically I had heard that too, because I was really looking forward to Dave's opinion on the show. And that kind of blindsided me, like, whoa, what? Huh? Cause I will definitely admit being a fan of, Bruce's podcast. Like, I don't know if I would have had the tip, to do the Gino Hernandez episode without, Bruce's, with you and Bruce's episode about, when you guys talked about Houston wrestling. That was amazing. Yeah. And then of course, getting Bruce to be part of the show, which you did, as well. Back in season 1, but I will say that that is just not true in terms of Dave's participation and that decision to have him be whether or not to have him part of the Benoit episode. And when I heard that, I definitely called him to talk about it because I wanted to clear the air on that, which was basically this the whole creative approach we wanted to take with telling the Benoit story was doing something from within the inner circle of the family and really hearing from the voices of the people that this affected the most. I mean, or as many people we could get to tell that story. And, you know, Dave, you know, he had a relationship with Chris. He knew Chris and some of those people, but any external voices that we wanted from this inner circle, we wanted to be totally objective in order to walk us through some of the more, you know, difficult and horrendous details of that weekend. And that was something that was, from a journalistic standpoint, was really important to us. But I will have to say, as a wrestling fan, having to, you know, have something be falsely reported in the Observer about you, and then having to call him and clarify that,
it's ridiculous,
is a kind of weird, meta, bizarre rite of passage, I think.
No, listen, I thought the same thing. I was like, this is great. These guys were supposed to be telling a story, and now they're the news themselves. But to be clear, Bruce Pritchard is not going to appear on season 2, with the exception of an excerpt from a podcast here or there, but he's not involved with the process. He didn't say, guys, don't call Dave Meltzer. None of that is remotely true. And Dave is still a great resource for wrestling insider knowledge. And I've been a 20-something year subscriber to the Observer. But for whatever reason, Dave had that little footnote inaccurate. There was never a plan to approach it from that way, and he's not banned from the series at all.
No, and the Wrestling Observer is, and this is what I told Dave too, is an incredible resource that we've used in all of our research, going into, you know, every story we've been telling.
Yeah, and I can't recommend it enough. But we also should mention, before we wrap things up here, that at the conclusion of the New Jack episode tonight on Vice, there is sort of a talk show after that maybe was inspired by The Talking Dead. Tell everybody what they can expect tonight after the New Jack episode ends.
That's right. So tonight on After Dark, which is the wrestling talk show that Vice has put together, even amidst a global crisis. So, you know, there were plans for it to be more of like a show on you know, in a studio with guests in person. But of course, given the situation, that's not possible. So they're still delivering the content, even despite all that. But the subject tonight is New Jack, and I believe that they're going to be talking with New Jack himself will be appearing on the show, which I cannot wait to see to see what his reaction is. And Tommy Dreamer, I think, is going to be on again, talking some New Jack stories in ECW. And oh man, it's escaping me who else is on tonight, but I think it's going to be pretty interesting. I don't think people are. Oh no, I'm sorry, I just remembered.
Could they get Sandman?
No, I totally just had a brain thing. Sandman's going to be on as well, and Mustafa. I think they got Mustafa. I'm not 100% sure, but they got Mustafa. So you're definitely going to want to tune into that.
Well, I can't wait to see that. And on the heels of that, we're going to get the band back together here. It'll be me, Jason, and Evan. We're going to carry you through every single episode on the series. We hope to be the perfect companion piece. So you've got sort of cool bookends here. Where you get to see some of the subjects that they're interviewing and then hear from the guys who helped put it together. Really nice. And I'm looking forward to breaking this down, because the New Jack story, while it may have been a little more underground, it's maybe the most outrageous you're going to cover. Evan, if you don't mind, run through, you know, after New Jack, what the rest of the season looks like, because there's been lots of rumor and innuendo about what the other topics might be.
Oh, right. Yeah. I'm going to pull it up right here. Because I don't have this memorized. But basically, where we're going after New Jack is we are going to be going to the Brawl for All, a episode that Jason and I started work on season 1, and we're luckily able to finish for season 2. And it's an interesting one. It's also a fun one as well. But I know it's a subject that you've covered before, Conrad, and so it'll be interesting to see what you have to say about that. After that, we're going to the Jimmy Snuka story, which will be on April 14th, and talking about the death of his girlfriend, Nancy Argentino, and the controversies surrounding that story and has it's been investigated over the course of 30 plus years. From that, a highly anticipated episode, which kind of surprised me, but online, a lot of people are looking forward to the assassination of Dino Bravo, which is going to be on April 21st. And then the following week after that, on April 28th, is going to be our episode about the slap heard round the world, which will be about the story about Dr. D. David Schultz and his infamous appearance on the ABC News 2020 expose on wrestling back in 1983. And then an episode, maybe the one that I'm looking forward to the most, on May 5th will be the story of Herb Abrams and the fall of the UWF. That's something no one's going to want to miss. Trust me, believe me. And then the following week, May 12th, will be the Road Warriors episode that we're working on like crazy right now. And then following that will be our season finale episode, one that was really near and dear to my heart, which will be on May 19th, Tuesday, May 19th, which will be on the final days of Owen Hart.
Owen Hart is going to be the one that everybody's talking about, and I'm certainly looking forward to it. But the idea that you're doing something on Abrams, man, if you think this New Jack story is wild, that's another level, is it not?
Yeah.
Totally other level.
When we spoke to Chris Jericho on his podcast about it, we were saying that the Herb Abrams reenactment set was the only time on this show where we had to have multiple close sets.
That's amazing. There's so much silliness coming your way in that episode, but the Dino Bravo episode, if I'm honest, that might be the one I'm looking forward to the most. I mean, I know this sounds really, really silly to talk about real people in a movie setting, but I really enjoy mob and gangster movies, and the idea that there was some sort of crossover between that sort of fictional world, at least in my movie mind. Obviously it's a real thing, or once upon a time was, but it sort of collides with wrestling, and there's so many sort of unanswered questions about it. This is going to be a great season. I'm really thrilled to be involved with this with you guys and have an opportunity to talk to you about the shows. And I can't wait to watch New Jack again tonight with my wife for the second time, because she's even asking, hey, when is that show coming on TV so we can watch it again? So we're pumped, man. We appreciate you taking time to join us today. And don't forget, when you're on social media, join the conversation on hashtag Dark Side of the Ring. And be sure to follow them on Twitter if you're not already. It's at Dark Side of Ring, or if you're on Instagram, it's at Dark Side of the Ring. But Twitter is where most of the wrestling content happens these days, and that's where I'll be. And I'm looking forward to catching up with you guys after we see New Jack.
Sounds good, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Conrad.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I come out with the weapons, diving on shit, like blood and guts every goddamn night.
The line in wrestling between cooperation and physical assault is blurred.
He fucked some people's lives up. What I'm gonna do to him, people gonna be talking about this 10 years from now. He's stabbing his mother. Oh! Well, it's been 20 years and we still talking about it.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.